Right, it's disco time. Not that kind of disco.
7 signals appeared across the galaxy.
Yellow alert.
And with it, perhaps any chance of a relationship with my brother Spock.
That ship is Vulcan.
The ship is Ceres. Spock is connected to them.
What did he see in them that I can't?
You are the Federation's puppet.
My failure to understand feels like a failure to reach him at a time when he might need me most.
I am sorry for what I did. I will find him.
Hello, welcome to the channel if you're new here. I'm Phil and I talk about all sorts of pop culture, geeky pop culture type things, including Star Trek Discovery, which at the moment I'm doing weekly reviews on as soon as they've dropped on Netflix here in the UK, because we get it on Netflix here on a Friday. This week's episode is called Point of Light, so let's just get into it. In some ways, this episode felt like it was taking a step back into sort of Season 1 territory. Now, that may be good, that may be bad, depending on your views on Series 1. I personally didn't mind Series 1. I thought it started quite bad and got progressively better. But the type of storytelling they were doing there was very serialized and plot arc heavy. And personally, I love that sort of stuff. And we got a lot of it. And this episode feels like it could slot into that, because there are lots of... This episode is very much building on all of the various different plot arc elements. Whereas last week we had what I felt was quite a nice blend with New Eden. We had quite a nice blend of single story adventure. What am I trying to say? Single story adventure with the threads of the plot arc threaded into that. And it kind of all blended really nicely last week. They've seemed to have abandoned that this week. That kind of having a very cohesive single plot to focus on. And instead what we've got is 2, 3 even sort of very different plot arc elements going on at the same time, and we just cutting between them. There are good points and bad points to this. I mean, what you end up with is it feels like a lot of setup for stuff that's still to come. And I think we got that from all of the arcs. We got set up from the Klingons with the baby and the political situation there. If anything, actually, the Klingons was probably the plot that felt most like an actual fully formed plot. We got a little bit more towards the Spock stuff and a little bit more exposition towards that. And then, of course, we got Tilly and the Spore as well. All of it kind of felt like it was setting up stuff that's going to come later. So I'm hoping, bang my elbow there, we get more episodes like New Eden spaced between episodes like this. Because if we get too many episodes like this, I think it's going to feel a bit plot heavy all of the time. The other negative of an episode like this is it's not really one you'll go back and rewatch by itself. New Eden, I can see myself maybe like going back on Netflix and going, I fancy watching an episode of Star Trek Discovery, what shall I watch? Maybe New Eden. That was an episode I might do that. This is an episode which you'd only really watch again if you're in the middle of a marathon, or if you want to research something, I suppose, that was in it. But mostly, if you're just doing a marathon the whole series, you wouldn't probably go back and just watch this independent all by itself. Out of these 3 plots, probably the least, I suppose, not least important, because it is really important to the overall plot arc, but the least exciting in this particular episode was Burnham's plot with Spock and her adopted mother, Amanda. It was lovely to see Amanda, because I think she's an interesting character and we could get some nice stuff from her. But that whole plot just seemed to be the sort of not the focus of the episode, and the most inconsequential of the bunch. Now, one thing I will say about that plot is that we got to see more evidence of Burnham's development a little bit here, where she's learnt from her mistakes and she's not questioning orders so much. When Amanda comes to her with the Spock's medical records and says she stole them, Burnham could just try and hack it there and then, but she doesn't. She utilizes the chain of command. She takes it to her captain and points out to her captain that he would have the authority, and there's precedence for captains to have the authority to unlock those records if they so should wish. And she's followed the proper protocol there, which is something, it's definitely character development from series 1, season 1. So that's nice to see that they're continuing to thread that elements in, because I mentioned that last week, but I was also slightly worried that they would just back out of it again the very next episode when it was convenient. So let's see if that continues, if the development continues with her there. Now, the stuff about Spock is a little bit interesting. The whole angle with her, with their mother, or adopted mother in the foster mother in the case of Michael. The whole case with Amanda of not giving enough love to Spock and instead giving that to Burnham because she felt she couldn't, because Sarek wanted Spock to be raised in the Vulcan way without emotion. That's quite interesting stuff, and actually it was something that was explored in the very first Star Trek Discovery time novel, which I did a video on asking, does this book solve Star Trek's continuity issues? I'll put the link in a card above. I did that video a while ago, way before Series 2. At the time, they were talking, when they were releasing these books, they were saying they'd liaised with the production team, and they were going to be official books, they were going to be canon, the stories were going to link in somehow. And so it was quite exciting, and that's why I bought it, because Star Trek books generally are renowned for being non-canon. People contradict them all the time. But I was curious to see whether or not they would contradict anything in Season 2, because Spock and the Enterprise appear in that story, as does Pike. So I was waiting to see if anything would get contradicted. And the very fact, I mean, from the very first episode of this series, it contradicted that book, because in that book, Spock and Burnham meet, whereas it's quite clearly established this season that they haven't seen each other since childhood. So already that book is out of the window, but they do seem to be taking some thread elements from it. The stuff with Amanda and the fact that she gave all her love to Burnham and not to Spock, that was in that book, so I don't know whether or not they've taken that from the book, or whether or not that was something that the book, in liaison with the TV production team at the time, had sort of, they'd found out that was the plan, and so they incorporated it into the book. Why I think this season contradicts the book completely is because I think the plan for Season 2 massively changed. They threw the Enterprise in at the end of Series 1. I'm British, I'm going to keep saying series, sorry about that. At the end of Season 1, we call seasons series in the UK for a lot of stuff, if you're wondering. So they threw that Enterprise in there just to as a big, wow, let's wow our audience, let's give them something to talk about to get them back for Season 2. But I don't think they really knew what they were planning. I think that was a kind of last-minute addition that they just threw in there and then had to work it out. And you can see that in the very first episode when they find the Enterprise. There are all systems are down apart from life support, and yet suddenly, at the beginning of Season 2, they can beam over, they can communicate, they can request permission to come aboard, and suddenly it's not as much of a desperate situation as it painted at the end of Season 1. So there were clearly some changes in the plans that went along there, and I think that affected the continuity and the validity of the books in terms of canon as well, which is a shame, because I like it when books tie in nicely. Also on Discovery, we had, of course, the Tilly plot, which I mentioned last week, because this is a thread that started in last week's episode where she had her imaginary friend, and I was saying, well, it could be just that she knocked her head and is hallucinating, or maybe this is the Red Angels. Those were the two things I posited then. I did not predict what actually happened, but it was somewhere in between the two. That accident did cause her to I don't know, the spark of electricity interacting with the spores somehow. I can't remember the exact gist of it, but basically caused that spore to start appearing and integrate more fully in her. It had landed on her at the end of the last season. Anyway, so she's got this spore imaginary friend person that's trying to it's got some kind of agenda. It wants to speak to the captain, but not Pike. It doesn't think Captain's the Pike when it meets it. That's not the captain. The captain's whiter, he's, blonde hair and stuff. So it's not Lorca either. Who are they talking about? And it turns out it's Stamets. Stamets is the captain, because she is a spore from the Mycelial network, and somehow she has, when Discovery was flying through the Mycelial network, to the spore, obviously to this sentient spore, it looked like Stamets was the captain, because he was the one navigating, he was the one in the chair, he seemed to be the one in control of where the ship was going. Hence, captain. Now, for me, this whole storyline kind of retroactively improved last week slightly, because I found Tilly's whole plotline last week quite annoying, and I found her quite annoying, especially paired up with Tilly, somebody, I said this last week, that is sometimes I find her really annoying, sometimes I find her, fine, sometimes I actually really like her, depending on how she's used in an episode and how much full-on her slightly quirkiness is. I don't like it when it's too full-on. And here, I think it was just about right, because they used the quirkiness in a way, in a serious way, and often it's just played for comedy, but I like the way they used her slightly quirkiness to ramp up the tension and make it slightly sinister. And then you got her imaginary friend, May, who last week I found very, very annoying, because I thought the way she was used and the fact that she had all these slightly quirky eccentricities, just the two of them together was just a bit too much. This week, I don't mind it as much, because those quirky eccentricities started to be more sinister, and that worked a lot better than just the cheery, friendly, imaginary friend angle they were taking last week. And I think they added some extra distortion on the voice and things and the sound effects that gave the impression and made you wonder whether or not Tilly had gone completely nuts or if there was something more going on. I do think the way that Burnham just sort of instantly diagnosed Tilly was a little bit stretching believability. It seemed to be like, okay, once again, this is our main character, she has to solve all the problems, which is a criticism I've seen lots of people make, and sometimes I think that criticism goes too far, but there are points when I can see it, and this was one of them. Getting the sport out was another thing I didn't really like, though, in this plotline. It was just... First of all, the visual effects. It looked like something more from Harry Potter than Star Trek. It looked like somebody was casting a spell on her, like an Extractriarmus or something like that. It looked like Harry Potter magic. So it just didn't seem to fit into the world of Star Trek for me. And then this whole big massive spore, I was expecting it to be this little tiny thing. It's this big massive ball of stuff comes out of her. It's like, how did that even happen? Like, one spore that got absorbed into your skin, I can imagine that coming back out. But I didn't like that scene. It just seemed way out of place with the sort of rest of the tone. So that was that plot line. Mixed results on that, I think. Then we've got the Klingon stuff. I kind of like the route they're going down with the Klingons here. Let's talk about continuity briefly, because they seem to be making an effort to fix some continuity problems from the first series. I made a video way back after the very first episode of Star Trek Discovery, talking about the continuity inconsistencies with the rest of the Prime timeline, and one of the big aspects of that was the Klingons. Why do they not have any hair? Why are their ships all funny? All of that stuff. And they seem to be addressing those here. They've grown their hair back. There's a line about that they apparently during the war just decided not to grow their hair. A cultural thing. Why not? It may not have been related to the war, but for a period of time, the culture, the fashion was to take off all your hair. And now after the war, they're having a bit of a rethink and growing it out again. Some into the more traditional, the older Klingon in this had the more traditional Klingon locks. L'Rell herself had more traditional, although a bit more done up than I think some Klingons usually are. And then you had some with like mohawks and some with buns and some, they're growing it out. They're trying different styles. Fine. And then you also get the D7 battlecruiser that they talk about planning to build. And that is addressing the inconsistency with the ships. There's a whole thing about where the augments have gone, because if you know anything about Trek lore, you'll know that the original series, all the Klingons have smooth heads. Deep Space Nine, when they time travel back to the original series era, Worf just makes a glib comment about how they don't like to talk about it. And then we finally get the explanation in Star Trek Enterprise of why they look different from Klingons we've seen in every other series. I mean, the real reason is obviously just production decided to change the design when it came to the movies after the original series. But in Enterprise, they explained that there was a augment virus that affected quite a lot of Klingons, but not all of them. to give them smooth foreheads, and that's why we got the smooth foreheaded aliens in the original series. This series is set 10 years before then, so where are they? Why are we not seeing some of them? I wondered if they would go down the route of having Tyler link into that somehow, and maybe he leads that group of them, because he looks kind of human, and they look kind of human, the augments, so maybe that. Are they going to have an uprising where they come up? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if they're going to explain that at some point, but I'm just curious that wasn't even mentioned. Given that Tyler looks human, that nobody even mentioned that, hey, you look like those augmented Klingons we don't like, augmented virusy Klingons we don't like. Nothing. So that was a bit of a shame. I kind of like the fact that we're seeing this, and it doesn't always have to tie directly into the main plot that the crew of the Discovery are going through. We get to see these different parts of the universe. That's quite nice. I quite like that. The whole baby plot, though, I did think it felt a bit rushed. We had never seen any hint of it before then, and suddenly we got baby, discovery of baby gets kidnapped, and suddenly baby is being put on into a monastery or something by the end of the episode. It was very rushed, but again, a lot of this stuff depends on what comes later. Will this pay off in the end? Is there going to be something with this kid later on, in which case it might have been worth doing? If there wasn't, it was a very strange choice to have it, and seems like just a bit of a plot device to get Tyler off the planet, which I think is not as strong a plot as if they've got something planned for the baby later on. So we'll see how that goes. I really like the fight scene that they had. The Klingons fighting, it was very brutal. It seemed like very naturally Klingon-esque in the brutality of the fight scene, and I think that was filmed very well. And of course we had Empress Georgiou appear at the end, who is working for Section 31 now, and has a vested interest in, Section 31 have a vested interest in keeping L'Rell in place for the stability of the Federation. So that was interesting. I like the Section 31 ship. They seem a lot of them. You know, they were quite, every other time we've seen them, they've been like a few operatives here and there, other than obviously in, although even in the Kelvin timeline, they were, they had a big massive ship, but it was manned by like 2 people. So they've always seemed like there are only a few people, and that's how they keep sort of secret, but they don't seem that secret here, and that seems like an inconsistency as well, because they've always been this sort of shady secret element of the Federation and Starfleet. Are they going to become that, or is it just that people don't really know exactly what they are, but they've heard rumours? I don't know. I keep my mind open on this one. It could go either way. It could be good. It could be bad. We will see. I like Georgiou. I like the character of the Empress. I think she's got a long way to go in the series, and some interesting stuff to go. She's got this kind of cold, harsh. I think she's much better. The actress is much better as Georgiou than Empress Georgiou than she was as Captain Georgiou. I can't even say that word now. Georgiou. So that was interesting development. I'm not sure how I feel about it though. The look of this episode, as it always looks cinematic, it always looks beautiful. It was very, very well shot. I liked some of the visual trickery they did, some of the SFX when Burnham and Tyler were having their hologram communication. I like the way they framed that. I like the way they had sort of on screen for us, half the shot was Burnham's quarters, half was Tyler's on Kronos. I like the way that looked. That was a very nice little bit of visual wowing for us at home. Was there anything else? They seem to be wanting to fix a lot of continuity stuff in lines in this episode. And one of the other things was Pike mentioning that he's old. He likes to use screens. Or the person he was talking to mentioned that Pike likes to use view screens rather than holograms, because one of the biggest problem with the continuity is the technology, and the fact that it's way too advanced for what it should be at this time in the Star Trek timeline. And it's the main bugbear that I have. I'm sure lots of you do too, if you're long-term Star Trek fans, is that they shouldn't have holograms at this point. They don't start using holograms regularly until Deep Space Nine. They used them so regularly here. Why have they stopped using them by the original series only 10 years later and never seemed to use them again for communication up until Deep Space Nine? Doesn't make any sense. So that's a little bit of bugbear of mine, and this doesn't really do much to fix it. Pike saying, "Oh yeah, I don't like using them. I like view screens." What does that solve? Nothing. Overall, because of it felt like a lot of setup, and it was a very story arc heavy episode, but where not much really impacty happened. No, nothing really impacted emotionally our characters, other than on the Klingon stuff, I suppose. It kind of felt like a bit of a step back, especially from how well they blended the two sort of styles of Trek, from Discovery's first season to the more standalone style of previous Trek, and they blended them so nicely last week that it seems like a bit of a step back this week. As long as they don't do it too much, it won't be too bad, but overall, I would probably say this is the weakest episode of the season. I know we've only had 3 episodes, so it's not much to go on, but so far, this is probably my weakest episode of the season. And, yeah, I mean, some of this stuff might be better on retrospect, depending on what comes next. So, we'll see at the end of the season. But that's my thoughts. What do you think? Did you like this episode? Which bits did you like? What did you not like? Let me know in your comments below. Any theories of what's going to happen next? Love to hear them. Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like the video and press all the buttons. Like the video, subscribe, all that kind of jazz. That would be much appreciated. Thank you very much. And yeah, check out some more videos here. Check out last week's review and something else YouTube thinks you might like. Thanks a lot, and I'll be back for more Star Trek reviews next week. Goodbye.